I never thought a single sentence could change the entire direction of your life. But that is exactly what happened to me. And I know that sounds dramatic. I know you are probably thinking, okay, here we go, another exaggerated story, another person trying to make something small seem bigger than it was. But I need you to stay with me. Because what I am about to tell you is not small. It was never small. It just took me years, almost 2 full decades of my life, to understand that. So please, sit down, get comfortable, because this story does not have a short version. This story has a beginning that stretches all the way back to a childhood I spent feeling like something was wrong with me, a middle that was full of confusion and hiding and shame, and an ending that I am still living right now, every single day, and finally, it feels like the right one. Let me start at the very beginning. I was 7 years old. It was the week before Halloween and my older sister had this enormous box of costume pieces in her room. Wigs, scarves, old jewelry, fabric, hats, everything. She was 13 and she thought she was too old for Halloween, but she still kept all that stuff. And one afternoon when the house was empty and everyone had gone out, I wandered into her room. I do not know why. I was bored, maybe. Or maybe something was already pulling me somewhere I did not have words for yet. I opened that box and I just stood there looking at everything inside it. And then, without really thinking, I pulled out this long burgundy skirt. It had little embroidered flowers near the hem. I held it in my hands for a long time. And then I put it on. I stood in front of my sister's mirror and I looked at myself. And I felt something that I had never felt before. Not fear, not at first. Something quieter than that. Something that felt like arriving somewhere after a very long trip. I did not understand it. I was 7. I just knew that the feeling was real and that it scared me because it was so real. I took the skirt off, folded it badly, shoved it back in the box, and ran out of the room. And I told myself it never happened. But things like that do not just disappear. They do not obey you when you are 7 and frightened and have no framework for what you felt. They stay. They wait. And they find ways to come back. Throughout the next few years of my childhood, I kept having these moments. Small ones. Quiet ones. A friend's sister leaving a cardigan on the couch and me holding it for a second longer than I should have. A drama class in 5th grade where the boys were supposed to play one set of characters and the girls another, and I kept watching the girls' side, not with envy exactly, more with this ache I could not name. A Halloween in 6th grade where I went as a vampire but spent the whole night noticing a classmate who had dressed as a vintage movie actress. The pearls, the gloves, the posture, and feeling something twist deep inside me. I did not understand any of it. I just carried it all. Middle school was when it started to get harder. Because middle school is when the rules of gender become enforced in ways that feel almost violent in their clarity. Boys here, girls there. Boys wear this, girls wear that. Boys act like this, girls act like that. And if you do not fit neatly into the box you are assigned, the other kids are quick to let you know. I became very good at performing the version of myself that everyone expected. I was loud when I was supposed to be loud. I played the sports I was supposed to play. I laughed at the things I was supposed to laugh at. But underneath all of that performance was this quiet, consistent, persistent feeling that I was playing a character. That the real thing, whatever it was still back in that box in my sister's room, waiting. High school arrived and with it came a new level of pressure. And a new set of hiding techniques. By this point I had gotten very skilled at pretending. I dated because I was supposed to. I hung out with the right people. I said the right things. But I also had a secret that I had been carrying so long it had started to feel like a physical weight. Because by now I knew, on some level, that what I had been feeling since I was 7 years old was not a phase, was not confusion, was not something that would just go away if I ignored it long enough. It was something real about who I was. And the thought of anyone knowing terrified me so completely that I had built my entire personality around keeping it hidden. Junior year. That is when I met her. Her name was Priya, and she sat next to me in AP English, and she was one of those people who had this effortless quality of not caring what anyone thought of her in the best possible way. Not recklessly, not rudely, but genuinely. She wore vintage clothes and had strong opinions about literature and laughed too loud and said exactly what she was thinking and somehow made all of it look easy. We became friends slowly, the way real friendships actually happen, not in one dramatic moment but over dozens of small ones. Lending pens. Complaining about essays. Sharing earbuds in the hallway. And somewhere in that slow accumulation of small moments, I started to trust her. The Halloween of junior year was when everything changed. Our school did this thing where seniors could wear costumes on the last day before Halloween weekend. Priya was a senior. I was not. But she had roped me into helping her put together her costume because she said I had good taste, which I did, for reasons I was not explaining to anyone. We were in her room one afternoon going through options and she pulled out this whole collection of vintage pieces and we were laughing and trying things on over our regular clothes, and then she held up this incredible 1950s circle skirt, black with small white polka dots, and she handed it to me, completely casually, and said just try it on, it'll look amazing for a costume, and the way she said it, so light, so unbothered, made me freeze. And then she said, it's just a costume. And I slid it on over my jeans and stood in front of her mirror and she clapped and said, see, perfect, and I was laughing too, but inside something enormous was cracking open. That was the sentence. It's just a costume. Except for me, standing in that mirror, it was not just anything. It was the most myself I had felt in years. Maybe ever. My hands were shaking a little. Priya did not notice, or if she did not say anything. And I pulled the skirt off and handed it back and we kept laughing and the afternoon moved on. But I could not stop thinking about it. I went home that night and lay in bed staring at the ceiling and I thought, what is wrong with you? And then I thought, maybe nothing is wrong with you, and both of those thoughts terrified me equally. The next few months were some of the most internally turbulent of my life. On the outside, nothing changed. I showed up to school, I did my work, I maintained all my performances. But on the inside I was having this slow, grinding, exhausting argument with myself. Part of me was insisting that what I had felt was nothing, that it was a fluke, that it meant nothing. And another part of me, a quieter and more honest part, was saying, you have been feeling this since you were 7 years old and you know exactly what it means, and you have just been too afraid to say it. That second part was getting louder. It had been patient for a long time. It was running out of patience. Priya noticed that something was going on with me before I admitted it to myself. She had that quality, that attention that good friends have, where she could tell when someone she cared about was carrying something heavy. One afternoon we were sitting in her car in the school parking lot waiting for the rain to slow down and she just looked at me and said, okay, what is it? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, you have been somewhere else for months and I want to know where. And I opened my mouth to say I was fine, to say it was just stress, to say the thing I always said. And instead what came out of my mouth, in a voice I barely recognized, was, I think I have been lying to myself for a very long time. That was all I could manage. But it was the first true sentence I had said out loud in years. And Priya just looked at me for a moment and then said, okay. Tell me when you are ready to say the next one. And she turned on the radio and we sat there until the rain stopped and she never pushed and she never made it weird, and it was one of the most important moments of my life. I did not say the next true sentence for another 3 weeks. And when I did, it came out all at once, messy and terrified, sitting on Priya's bedroom floor surrounded by fabric swatches because she was making something for an art project and I was supposedly helping. I told her that I had been feeling since I was a child like something about the way I was supposed to exist in the world did not fit. That the clothes, the expectations, the performance of who I was supposed to be, it had always felt like a costume. And that the closest I had ever felt to being real, to being actually myself, was that afternoon with the polka dot skirt in her mirror. And I was terrified that what that meant was something that would make people see me completely differently. And I did not know what to do with any of it. I said all of this very fast with my eyes on the floor. And when I finally looked up, Priya was just watching me with this expression that had no judgment in it at all. And she said, thank you for trusting me with that. And then she said, what do you want to do about it? Not what does it mean, not are you sure, not a single question that was about her comfort or her reaction. Just, what do you want to do about it? And I started crying. The kind of crying that comes from something that has been held in so long it has forgotten how to come out quietly. What happened next was slow. It was careful. It was not a movie moment where everything suddenly becomes clear and colorful and easy. It was real life, which means it was complicated and uncomfortable and full of backtracking. Priya helped me, gently and without pressure, to start exploring in private what it meant to present myself differently. We started small. A scarf. A cardigan. Simple things that could pass as nothing if anyone asked. But each small thing was enormous to me on the inside. Each one felt like a tiny door opening onto a room I had been locked out of my entire life. And with each door, the feeling that had started when I was 7 years old in front of my sister's mirror became more and more clear. Not louder. Exactly. Clearer. Like adjusting the focus on a lens until you can finally see what the picture actually is. I turned 18 that spring. And something about that shift, about legally being an adult, about being able to make my own choices without anyone's permission, made something in me settle into a decision I had been circling for months. I was going to stop pretending. Not all at once, not loudly, not without care for the people in my life who I knew this would surprise or confuse or upset. But I was going to stop pretending. To myself, first. And then, one person at a time, to the world. I did not know what label to put on what I was. I am still not entirely sure the label matters as much as the freedom matters. What I knew was that the way I felt most alive, most present, most genuinely myself was when I was not performing the version of me that I had been performing since middle school. And I was done performing it. The conversation with my family was the thing I had dreaded most. My parents are not bad people. They are complicated people, the way almost everyone is, with their own histories and their own fears and their own ideas about how things are supposed to be. My father in particular was someone I had spent years trying not to disappoint. He had certain ideas about who I was and who I was going to be, and I had spent a very long time trying to match those ideas even when they did not fit. The conversation happened at the end of that summer, before I left for college. I had rehearsed it so many times in my head that by the time I actually sat down with my parents in the kitchen I felt strangely calm. Like the nervousness had used itself up. I told them what I had told Priya, though in different words, more carefully, with more explanation. I told them I had been feeling since I was very young that something about the way I was expected to present myself did not match who I actually was. That I was not trying to be dramatic or to hurt anyone. That I had tried for years to make the feeling go away and it did not go away. And that I hoped they would try to understand even if it took time. My mother started crying. My father went very quiet. There was a long silence that felt like it lasted years. And then my father said, in a voice I had never heard him use before, lower, slower, he said, I do not understand all of it. But I know you. And I know you would not say this if it was not real. And we will figure out the rest. It was not perfect. It was not a perfect conversation, and what came after was not perfect either. But it was real. And that was everything. College was where I began to actually become myself. Not in a dramatic single moment, but in the way that real becoming actually works, which is slowly and sometimes painfully and with a lot of getting things wrong and trying again. I found communities of people who understood what I was going through, not because they had the same exact experience, but because they understood what it felt like to have spent years performing a version of yourself that did not fit. I found language for things I had been feeling without words for. I found courage, not the movie kind of courage where you suddenly become fearless, but the real kind, which is doing the terrifying thing anyway while still being afraid. I started dressing the way I actually wanted to dress. Not every day, not always, but more and more. And every time I walked out of my dorm room in something that actually felt like me, the world did not end. People did not react the way my fear had told me they would. Some people did not notice. Some people noticed and said nothing. Some people noticed and said something kind. And some people, yes, some people were unkind. But even that, even the unkindness, felt somehow more bearable than the years I had spent hiding. Because at least I was being unkind to, rather than being erased by my own performance of someone else. There was a day in the second semester of my freshman year. I want to tell you about this day because it was the moment when something inside me shifted from surviving to actually living. I had gotten dressed that morning in this flowy printed top and wide-leg trousers, and I had done it without the usual 10-minute argument with myself in front of the mirror about whether I was allowed to, whether I was going too far, whether I should just put on the usual thing and be safer. I just got dressed and I walked to class and I sat in my seat and I listened to the lecture and I took notes and I had lunch with friends and I walked back across campus in the afternoon light, and at some point in the middle of all of that ordinary day I realized I had not thought once about whether I was performing correctly. I had just been there. Present. Myself. And the feeling that came with that realization was something I do not have a word for. Not happiness exactly, though it was that. It was more like relief on a scale I did not know relief could reach. Like putting down something you have been carrying for so long you forgot it was there. I called Priya that night. We were at different schools by then, but we talked all the time. I called her and I said, I had a normal day today. And she knew exactly what I meant. She laughed in that too loud way of hers and said, "Tell me everything." And I did. There is something I need to say about the word costume. Because that word has followed me through this whole story and it means something specific to me now that it did not mean before. When Priya handed me that polka dot skirt and said it is just a costume, she meant it was something temporary, something playful, something you put on for fun and take off when the evening is over. And I understand why she said that. That is what a costume is supposed to be. But what I discovered, standing in that mirror, was that the costume was not the skirt. The costume was everything else. The costume was the years of performing the person I was expected to be. The costume was the forced laugh and the forced posture and the forced interests and the forced presentation that I had built and maintained so carefully for so long. The skirt was not the costume. The skirt was the mirror. And it showed me something true. And the truth, once you have seen it, cannot be unseen. You can ignore it. You can cover it over again. But it is there. It will always be there. And one way or another, eventually, it asks you to reckon with it. I am not going to pretend that everything is perfect now. That would be dishonest, and this story has had enough dishonesty in it already. There are still days when the old fear comes back. When I am in a situation where I know my choices are going to be misread or judged and the part of me that spent 15 years hiding wants to hide again. There are still moments with my father where the conversation is careful and a little fragile around this subject. There are still people who knew me before who are confused by who I am now. And I am still figuring out language and categories and what I believe about identity and expression and all the complicated layers of being a human person trying to live honestly. None of that is fully resolved. I do not think it ever fully resolves. I think it is ongoing. I think being yourself is not a destination you arrive at and then you are done. It is something you choose, again and again, every morning, in 1,000 small decisions. But here is what I know. Here is what I know as certainly as I know anything. I am more alive now than I have ever been. The version of me that spent years performing, hiding, suppressing, that version was surviving. This version, the one that gets dressed in the morning without an argument, the one that has real conversations instead of performed ones, the one that can call her best friend and say I had a normal day today and have her understand exactly what that means, this version is living. And the distance between surviving and living is not a small one. It is everything. It is the whole thing. When I was 7 years old and I held that burgundy skirt in my hands and stood in front of my sister's mirror, I did not know what I was feeling. I did not have any framework for it. I just knew it was real. And I spent the next decade and more running from that realness, building walls around it, performing over the top of it. And then one afternoon in a friend's room a girl held out a polka dot skirt and said it is just a costume, and I looked in the mirror and for one moment the walls came down and I saw clearly. And everything since then has been the slow, difficult, beautiful, terrifying work of building a life that matches what I saw in that mirror. A life that is mine. A life that is real. A life that is not a costume. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself somewhere in what I just said, the hiding, the performing, the feeling of wearing the wrong life, I want you to hear this. I am not going to tell you that it is easy. I am not going to tell you that coming out to yourself and to others is painless, or that everyone in your life will understand, or that the fear goes away completely. I cannot tell you that because it would not be true and you deserve the truth, not the comfortable version of it. What I will tell you is that the other side of the hiding is real. That the version of your life that matches who you actually are is not a fantasy. That there is a version of a normal day, a genuinely ordinary day of going to class and having lunch and walking home in the afternoon light, that feels like nothing short of a miracle because you are simply, finally, there. Present. Yourself. And that day is worth every hard thing you have to walk through to get to it. She said it's just a costume. And in that moment the costume I took off was not the skirt. The costume I started taking off was the one I had been wearing for 15 years. And now, on the other side of all of that, all I can tell you is this: the person underneath that costume was always there. She was always real. She was always worth knowing. And I am so glad, with everything I have, that I finally let her out.